Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this Django for Beginners tutorial series, we're creating a blog-style web application with Python Django. And by the end of this series, you will have a nice looking blog page like this that displays different posts and allows users to sign in and sign up, but also to create, edit, and delete different blog posts. Now, this is already the seventh video in this series, so if you want to know what we did previously, you can check out my channel here to see all of the details of where we have been so far. Now, in the last video, we ended right here, where we finished our navigation menu so that we now have a nice looking top bar with a logo and different menu items that bring us to different places, including all of the styling around it. Now, in this video, we're going to go one step further and we're going to be making sure that we can start creating some of the blog posts inside of our database and our application. And to do that, we're going to be following 6 steps. We're going to start by adding a new URL, view, and HTML page for creating records because we don't currently have that in our application. Then we're going to make sure that we can go to the create page from our blog post page so that users can go from the menu to a place where they can create posts. Next, we are going to make sure that we can create a form for creating posts so that users can put their input there and then submit it to create something in the database. Of course, that means that we need to add the form to the HTML page and we need to handle the submission logic of the form in our views. And as a last step, we will make sure to check the results in our database through our admin portal to make sure that the posts that we create are also actually in the database. Now, to explain a little bit how this create process will go, I have this image on the screen. Similarly as for the other pages, we first need to create a URL, a view, and an HTML template so that we have a create page that the user sees, but also that we have a view and a URL that specify the actions that need to happen, but also in which link we can find the create page. Then, to make sure that the users can input some information in a form, we're going to be creating a new file called a forms.py file. And in there, we can define the different forms and display them on our HTML template. Now, the first thing that we'll do right now is make sure that we have a URL, view, and HTML template for our create page. And we're now inside of our code. And the first thing that I will do is create the HTML template. And for that, I'm just going to copy over the home page. And I'm going to rename this copied over thing to the create.html page. Now, currently we extend the base.html page, which also contains the navigation menu. So that's all fine. And then we have some basic text that states welcome to the homepage and then a link to the blog posts. And right now on the create.html page, we can get rid of everything that is in the link. And we'll just say welcome to the create page so that we know that we are on the right page. The next thing that we need to create is a view. And in this instance, we can also just copy over the home view that we already have. And I'm going to put that on the end. And we're going to be calling this create. And we can get rid of this title and also everything inside of the context. And we're going to say that we want to return not the home.html page, but the create.html page. Now, the final thing that we need is a URL where we can find our create page. So we're going to go to the urls.py file. And also there, we're going to copy over an existing example from blog posts. And we're going to say that we want to find this page under the /create. The view that we want to link this to is views.create because that's the name of the view right here. And of course, the name here is also going to be create. And let's save that. And I've already started our server. And when we now go to our application and we go to /create, you will notice that it says welcome to the create page. So this seems to be working fine. Now, what I want to do is I want to go to the create page from my blog post. So I want to create a nice looking container right here that says this is the blog post page and then something that says create a blog post. So let's apply some styling and some elements right here to do that. So in our blog post.html file, we're not going to have the welcome to the blog post page and the URL links, but we're going to be creating a new element in here. So I'm going to create a div And in this div, we're going to give it the class name of main container. Because we want to create some kind of a container where we can put some of the content in. So inside of this container, I want to do two things. The first thing that I want to do is I want to create some kind of a title that says this is the blog post page, and then with a link to create a new blog post. So I'm going to create a div, and that div is going to contain two things. First of all, an h1 tag, and that h1 tag is going to set the title. So I'm going to say blog posts of user 1. And later on this tutorial series, once we have the login mechanism working, we're going to replace this by the actual name of the user that is logged in. Now, next to the title, I also want to have a link in here. So we do an a tag, and in here we say create blog post. And we are going to then also add a link to this create blog post page, because we have just created a page where we can create those blog posts. And we do some parentheses and then 2 times the percentage sign. And then we say URL, again, some of these quotes. And then we do create, because that's also the name in the urls.py file where we need to go. And now below this first initial section, I want to have another section. And in this section, we are going to list down all of our posts. So I'm going to say space for all of our posts. And we will populate this space in later videos. Now, of course, we've not applied any styling to our main container or these components yet, but let's just check out what it looks like at the moment. And if we refresh this page, you can see that we have something here, but it doesn't really look too good at the moment. So let's apply some styling. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that it kind of has a border and that it's about 80% of the screen and everything is aligned in the middle. So to do that, we first need to apply styling to the main container. So we're going to go to the main.css file, and on the bottom of the file, we're going to do a dot and then do main container. Now, as mentioned, I want the width to be around 80%, and I also want to have some kind of a border so that we clearly see what the container is. Now, what we can do is just say that we want to have a border of 2 pixels solid red. And if I now save this and we go back to the page, you will notice that we get some kind of a red border around it. And yeah, that we see it like this. However, I want something a little bit more subtle. And to do that, we can use something called box shadow. And that will apply a shadow around this box. So you will not have a real border, but actually some kind of a shadow area. So to do that, we do box shadow. And in there, we need to provide some things. Now, I already have a configuration that I want to use, and that configuration is 0, 4 pixels, 16 pixels. And then I want to have the color of RGBA. And then we do 0, 0, 0. And then as a last one, it's 0.08. Now, the first things are where the box shadow is applied, and the second one is what color. And this is just a configuration that I found somewhere online. And if I now refresh this, we can see that there is some kind of a shadow. So it's a really subtle way to define the outline. Now, next thing we want to do is we want to put this in the middle, because currently it is actually not in the middle of the screen. Now, to do that, we actually don't need to apply a change to the main container, but we need to take a look at the page.html page, because all of the content that we see for the blog post with the main container is in between these blog content boxes. And the blog content boxes are actually coming in this div. So in this div, we can set a class and we can say container. So it has a little bit of a different name. And now we can say that everything in the container needs to be in the middle of the page. So we're going to go to the main.css, do dot container. And now we can say that that container needs to be in the middle of the screen. So we can do a display of flags and then say justify content in the center. And let's see what that does. And now we see that it is in the middle of the screen. But I still think that it needs to go down a little bit because there needs to be a little bit of a margin between the nav bar and the actual box. So what I'm also going to add in the container is state that we want to have a margin on the top of around 100 pixels. And that will make sure that this moves a little bit down. And actually 100 is kind of much. So let's do around 50. And this already looks much better. Now I also want the corners of this box to be rounded so it looks a little bit more modern. So we can go to the main container again. And in the main container specify that we want to have a border radius of 16 pixels. And that will round off the corners like this. And what we also notice is that the content is straight at the border of this thing. And we actually want to give it some room on the inside so it's not going towards the corners. So we can do that with padding. So I can set the padding equal to 32 pixels. And now you notice that it's a little bit more spacious in there. Now, the only thing that I also want to do right now is make sure that the title and the link are on the same row. And then we can continue with making sure that we have the forms ready. Now, to do that, we go back to our code. And in our code, we go to the blog post.html file. And in there, we need to give this div a name because we want to format everything in between it. So we're going to say that this is a class. And I'm going to name this top bar. And now we can use the top bar to format these two things. So we can go to the main.css and say the top bar needs to be formatted a little bit. And the first thing that I want is that they are going to be on the same row. So we can say that we want to have a display of flags. And then I want to have a flags direction of a row because they need to be on the same row. And now they're actually next to each other. However, you still notice that there's quite a lot of differences between them. And if we inspect this and I check it like this, all of the items don't seem to be in sync because one has some margins and the other one is, yeah, just on the top. So let's fix that as well. Now, there are two things that we need to do to realize that. First thing is that we need to remove the margin from our title. So we can go to the blog post page and give this h1 tag a class equal to title. And now we can say that title in the main.css file does not need to have any margin. So we can set margin equal to 0. And that makes sure that it moves up a little bit, but it's still not perfect. Now to make sure that the title and the link are actually spaced between the entire length and that they're also vertically aligned, we need to add some commands in the top bar. And we can do the justify content of space between, and that will split them out. And we can do align items in the center. And if we refresh this, it now goes like this. And what we can also do is add a margin on the bottom so that the next section is a little bit further away. And we can do like 16 pixels. And that will move away this part a little bit down, like so. And for now, we're just going to leave it like this. Now we can go from our blog post page to the create page by using this. And of course, we have here welcome to the create page, but I'm actually going to apply the same container on the create page as that we have on the blog post page. So on the blog post page, we'll copy over everything we've done so far for the blog posts. And on the create page, we just paste it in right here, with the only difference that the title is going to be create a blog post, and we don't actually need the link. And also this bottom part for space for all of our posts, we don't really need. So this is all the content that we want to have there. And now we have a nice page where we can put our form. Now, of course, we currently don't have a form. So let's create that in our project right now. And as explained on the visual, to do that, we need to create a forms.py file, because in there we can create our own forms. So inside of our project, we are gonna go to the folder where all of our content lives. And in the same folder, so in the posts folder, we will create a new file called forms.py. Now in this file, we are going to start with some imports. So we do from Django import forms, and we also need to import all of our models. And the models is the structure of our database, where we currently say that our blog posts need to have a title and it needs to have some content. So also in the forms section, we do from that models import all. So defining a form is quite similar as defining a model. So we start with a class. So we can go to the forms and say that class blog form. And then in here we specify forms.model form. Now the ID is that for each of the columns inside of our database, we also define a form so that the user can input the right content and can store that in the database. Now currently our model has a title and also some content. And that means that for those two fields, we also want the user to provide some input. Now for the created on, the modified on, those are just things that are going to give us some timestamps in the database and are going to be populated automatically. So those ones actually don't require a form. So right now we will create only some form fields for the title and for content. Now the way that you do that inside of this blog form is you can simply say that we want to have title, and then we can say what kind of field this needs to be. So in this case, it is a forms dot var field, which is a character field. And now we can specify some parameters for this form. So the first thing we can provide is a label. And the label is what the user sees as the title of the form. So I can say blog post title. And then that will be the name of this form that is also visible in the screen. Another thing that I can define is the max length. What can the max length be of a title of one of our posts? And this way we can limit the user in how many characters he can use. And it's also nice to have the same length as you have in your database, because otherwise it will not work. So we set this max length to 100. Now you can also add some additional things in here. So for example, we can add a widget and then we can do forms.text input, and we can add some other attributes, do an equal sign, and then some squirrely brackets. And there we can define different other things. So one of the other things that we can define is a placeholder. And a placeholder means the text that is already pre-populated in the form kind of grayed out so that you can provide the user with context of what the expectation is for the form input. So in this case, we can say enter the title of your blog post. Now this has the title now defined, but we also want to have content. Now actually, it can be quite similar because, content is also going to be a character field. So we name this content. But the only thing we want to change is the label because that can be just content as well, but then with a capital. And the max length, we don't actually want that because blog posts can be quite long and we want them to provide as much information there as possible. And also for the placeholder, we can provide something else and we can say, write your blog post here. And now we have both of those fields defined. Now in this example, I'm using some character fields. But in the next videos, I will also show you how you can do image fields, select fields, and even multi-select fields. So there are a lot of different form options you can use. And you can also see that in the Django documentation, because if you check the different field classes, you see that it has the character field, but also choice fields, date fields, duration fields, email fields, and all different kinds of other options. So please check out the documentation and try out these different types, because for some columns, some other type of field might be more convenient. So now we have the different form fields defined in here, but we're still not done because we also need to provide something on the bottom here called class meta. Because Django wants to know, first of all, which model in our models.py file this form is going to populate so that it can link it all together. So in this case, we can say that the model is going to be equal to blog posts because that's the title of our model right here. Next to that, it also wants to know which fields it needs to render from this form because not all fields might be relevant. So we say fields, and then we do an equal sign and some square brackets. And in there, we say that we want to render the fields of title and content because those are the only ones that we currently have. And let's now save that. And now we have defined a form which is going to ask the user to provide a title and content for the blog post. Now, how do we get this form actually to our HTML page? Well, we do that through the view. So if we go to the views.py file, we can make sure that our form is imported in here and that we can render it through the view of create. So on the top, we do from dot forms, and then we import all. And then we need to go to the create view and we need to specify what our form is. And then we need to also put that form on the HTML page. So we can say that in the create page, form is equal to blog form. And everything that we want to bring from this view to the HTML page, we need to mention in the context. So we can say in the context that we want to bring something called form. And then we say that that is equal to form. And let's save that. So now this lists down what we want to bring and actually brings it to our HTML file through the context. So now we can go to our create.html file. And in there, we are going to first off start with a form tag because our form always needs to be defined in a form tag. Then we need to put a number of things in here. So for now, I'm just going to do 2 times the squarely brackets and we say form. And let's save that. And we've now refreshed the page and you can see that we have an actual form right here. So we have a blog post title where we can say this is the title. And then we also have content. So we can say this is my blog post. So we now have successfully put our form on this HTML page. Now, of course, we don't have any button that is currently submitting this thing. And we also don't have any logic that tells us what to do with these inputs of this form. So let's fix that right now. So to make sure that we can actually submit this form, we need to do a few things. Let's start in our HTML page because there we need to firstly say in this form tag that the method is going to be equal to post. And that lets it know that it expects to post the input of the form. Also, if we want to submit forms, we need to put in something called a CSRF token. So we also place that right here. And that actually means cross-site request forgery. And it's basically for protecting our form input when we submit it, so that no one can actually steal it. Now, what we will also need is a button to submit this. So we can put a button on this page, and we need to put the type on this button of submit, so that it knows that this is a submit button. And we can also do a class of button. And as the text, we are going to do submit your post. And now if we refresh this, we also have a button right here. So that can submit our post. But still in our view, we have not defined what we need to do when we have this information and it's submitted to our backend. So the next changes that we need to make are in our views.py file. So let's now write the logic for submitting the form in our view.py file. So the first thing that we need to do in this file is we need to say that if the user has clicked on the submit button, then we want to create a new record in the table called blog post, because that's what we want to achieve. That's where we want to store the blog posts. So in our views.py file, we start with a statement that says if request.method is equal to post, then we want to do something. And that method of post is recognized, of course, because in our create.html file, we say that the method is post. So the first thing we are going to define here is what we are going to be posting. So we say that we want to post a form, which is the blog form. where we state that the request dot post is what we want to do. And from here onwards, we can handle all of the logic for posting the actual data. So the first thing that we need to do is a check if everything that we put in the form is actually valid, because we don't want to submit this form if the data is not correct, because that will break also our database. So we can do if form dot is underscore valid, then we are going to do something. And if the form is not valid, we will simply not post it. So in here, we first start by defining which of the fields we want to submit. And of course, in our case, that is title, and the other one is content. And we list them down by doing form.cleaned data, and then we put in the name of the form right here. So in this case, for title, it's form.clean data and then title. And for content, it is form.clean data and then content. And this will again make sure that the data of our form is completely okay and cleaned. Then we are going to define what we want to do with this data. And what we want to do is we want to put it in our model called blog post. Now, currently we don't have the models imported in this page. So we're going to do from that models, and then we import the blog post model. And I'm actually also going to input the blog form on the top specifically, because then the error might stop right here. So then we say that blog is going to be equal to the blog post model. And now we need to define column by column what we want to store. So in the field of title, we want to store the value called title. And in the content, we want to store the value under content. So what we do is we do title is equal to title. And then we can say content is equal to content. And that makes sure that it knows that we expect the blog post to have the title and the content. Now, of course, we need to save this, and we do that by doing a blog.save. And that should make sure that when we fill in the forms and we click the button, it is going to save our form entry in the database. After we have saved our blog post, we want to go to another page, because the idea is that after we've created the blog post, we go to the My Blog Post page, and it will appear as the most recent post in this overview. So what we will do is we're going to go to our code again, and after the blog.save, we do a return redirect, and we redirect ourselves to the blog posts page, because that's where we want to go. And what we also want to do on the top of our file is also import redirect from Django.shortcuts, so that we can actually go to other pages. And this concludes the logic for creating a record. So let's now check if this actually works. So we're going to go to create blog post, and in here we are going to create a dummy blog post. So I'm just going to say my blog post title and my blog post content. And then we click submit. And it actually brings us back to my blog post page. And now, what we also did in previous videos, we can go to our Django admin portal and see if we actually see a record. So we're going to go to the localhost 8000/admin. And in there, we log in with the user one that we created in previous videos. And now we see our blog posts model right here. And we can see that we now have one entry called my blog post title. So we have successfully created our first blog post inside of our application. And that is actually all for this video, because we've successfully created forms in our application that can create blog posts. Now, of course, the current form does not really look that appealing. And it's also quite inconvenient because this is really small for the content. So in the next video, we're going to make sure that these forms look beautiful and that there's a much better and bigger area to define the content. And after that, we will also make sure that we can read the records from our database, that we can edit different blog posts, and that we can also delete them. I want to thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.